Hello and welcome to Capron's Cabin. I'm your host, Corey Capron, getting by on the lo-fi and riding out these strange times with the miracle of janky technology and friends from afar. Tonight we have some wonderful guests with me. We have Todd Ristau, who is a professor at Hollins University, playwright who's written quite a few fun plays over the years, from Jerry Lee Lewis to Hitler in the Bunker, but is probably, for me and my best known for being one of the founders of No Shame Theater back in the mid-'80s, open mic forum where you had about 5 minutes to not break the law, not break yourself, not break your audience, preferably no open flames. So I've seen you break that rule. And the alumni of it include, John Leguizamo, Artie, Strongest Man in the World from Pete and Pete, and many other wonderful people over the years. Todd, it's a delight to see you again. How you doing?
It's terrific to see you. I think this is the first time I've seen you, though I know the audience can't see you, without your trademark fedora and long black coat stomping your way through spoken word. So it's a pleasure to reconnect.
Yeah, they finally beat me. There was enough times where I'd go to like a bar and order like a nice beer, and someone would be like, "Yeah, with the fedora, you're one of them." And it's like, one of what? Okay, I give up.
Well, everybody needs a signifier.
Yeah. Also with us tonight is my old friend and arch nemesis of the world, Sean McCord. Sean McCord is the award-winning playwright of Moving and has...
and his dog, Spot.
Yes, Spot! And is also a former student of Todd's. Sean, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay, Corey. You've been a guest on my radio show, so it seemed only fair to turn the tables.
Full circle, and feel free to be as equally inflammatory and in need of apology afterwards as I was. All right.
No shame, no apologies.
Yes. And Sean, I believe you've brought someone with you.
You mean other than my dog Spot?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi.
Yes. Well, this is my Woody Allen moment in Annie Hall, where he's standing in a line and
I was about to get very different in my mind.
No. Remember when he's standing in the line for the movie, and a couple in front of him is expounding about Marshall McLuhan, and he says, "Well, I just happen to have Marshall McLuhan here," and he pulls him in to refute what the person is saying. Well, I have brought with me, since we're going to be discussing the Star Trek films, I have brought none other than the frozen prisoner of Rural Penta. If you've seen Star Trek VI, he's the hapless young alien who's thrown out into the snow.
Yeah.
My good and longtime friend, as in we go back to the 70s, Doug Engalla, who's beaming in here from the film capital of the world, North Hollywood. No, Sherman Oaks, Glendale. That's where you.
That's she was mentioned in some movie somewhere. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Pleasure to meet you, Doug.
Hello, Corey. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
You were in Star Trek VI, you say?
Yes. Yeah. And it was, I actually auditioned for the film. It was, so I got to audition in front of Nicholas Meyer and Mary Jo Slater, who was the casting director. And it was it's kind of surreal as a fan, because I never thought I'd find myself in that situation of auditioning in a Star Trek film. He was very patient with me, and I actually auditioned for a role other than the one I was cast in. I actually auditioned for the role that eventually went to Christian Slater. And so I was actually the last one to be cast, because they couldn't get an actor to be willing to be thrown out into the harsh conditions of Urapente. And so I said, sure, I'll do it. You know, he got me my SAG card, so
Yeah,
I thought, why not? Why not? Yeah. So it was a 2-day shoot in April of 1991, so 30 years ago this month, and it has afforded me a certain notoriety in that I thought, well, what the heck? I just joined Facebook. Why don't we start a fan page called The Frozen Prisoner from Star Trek 6? And it's still there, and I post occasionally. But yeah, it's been a pretty interesting journey since then.
That's fantastic. Wow. Sean, thank you so much for bringing a guest who had such a profoundly positive experience on a film that I was planning to attack. Well played, sir.
Yeah, good.
So let's jump to it. So what the tonight's episode is about is the long held trope in Star Trek fandom, as we've kind of alluded to, but you're all hardcore old school Star Trek fans. There's kind of this thing, I think I first ran into it like in the special features of Star Trek 6, and then kept seeing it on the internet afterwards, where people will go, the even ones are the best. Like, you can just skip the odd ones. Just go 2, 4, 6. The sort of Meyer trilogy. And you know, that I thought it would be a fun exercise, a fool's errand, to try to defend the films, and I will fail. But I do like the mental exercise. Also, looking at a franchise as a whole, not just the individual films. Maybe some of the things that in making that decision, those who do, they're kind of what's being forgiven and what's not among them. So you are not obligated to disagree with me. I expect some disagreements, but you know, ultimately it's just an examination of the films and kind of taking the beloved films and poking at them a bit, and you know, seeing what we can do about the less loved. In which case, let us begin. Where else but Star Trek the Motion Picture? Before I dive in, does anyone want to tell me that they were in that film as well and deeply loved it? Any fond stories for the one I have to defend?
I actually do have a story.
Okay, story time.
So I wish I could. Years later, I wish I could remember the fellow's name so I could give you verification. But he was a person that I knew up in the Bay Area. I can picture him. He was tall, thin, skinny, 20-year-old guy that I befriended casually, and turns out that we had Star Trek in common. This was 1978. We had Star Trek in common, and he was deeply involved in the Star Trek fandom. This was up in the Bay Area in California, and it was while I was out looking at colleges, and he was at San Francisco State, and he like gave me my first tour of San Francisco State or something, and we just hit it off because we were talking about Star Trek. And he mentioned that he had been approached through fandom to come down for a photo shoot in Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Remember the cargo bay where Kirk comes out and he tells this newly assembled crew that they're going to be leaving Earth and going out and confronting this unknown space menace, and they needed like 300 people in this cargo bay. And so they had reached out to Star Trek fandom to populate the cargo bay with these people. And so he mentioned that he was doing this, and I was like, dude, that is so cool that you're going to be a part of this. And he said, well, would you like to come along? I said, wait, seriously? We've literally known each other a day, and you want me to come down and be a part of Star Trek: The Motion Picture? My answer is A, of course, but B, wouldn't you rather invite a girl? And right? So he's like, yeah, you're the first person I've met who'd be interested. I said, dude, if you're going to do this, I'm in. Here's my phone number, which of course was, like my mom's number because I was still living at home. Said, but give me a call. I said, well, we're still working out the arrangements. I'll give you a call in a few days. So he calls me a few days later and said, I found a girl. I was like, absolutely. Absolutely, you should take the girl and go down and be a part of history. So it was the right decision to make. And you know what? I've looked at that photo of the crew standing there, in the cargo hold of the Enterprise, and I can spot him. I remember him because he was tall. He was kind of Waldo-like, very tall with brown glasses. Well, he took the glasses off for the photo shoot, but so he was there. But I also totally lost touch with him. So that was my brush with history. I wish, I kind of wish I could tell you that I was there in that shot, but I'm also kind of glad that I like to think that, he got the girl.
And a girl who was interested. So that's, that's a big deal.
Yeah, exactly.
So in
And
other
now
words,
he can't watch the film because he can only think about the breakup that came after. And he taking Sean.
Yeah, she's going,
Maybe.
this is what we came down here for? Thought we were going to look at the stars on the Walk of Fame or something.
Well, listen, I want to jump in and talk about the first film just a little bit from my vantage point of trying to reach back through the mists of memory to 1979. I was a much different person than the wizened fella you've invited here today.
you mean
there
you
were
all
no
did not?
girls in my life back then either.
No, he was like a long-haired bearded hippie.
But I just think that the first movie was an incredible achievement, and
Yes.
I can't imagine what it must have been like for Roddenberry after this love child of that TV series to kind of have an opportunity to come back to life in that way on the big screen, because
Yeah.
it had only had 3 series, and he had kind of built into the introduction that he was hoping for five seasons, but it only had 3. And he had all these plans for a sequel series, phase 2, that never happened. Of course, I didn't really think
Sure.
about or know any of this when I saw it in 1979. But you have to remember, Star Wars had already been out for what, like 3 years, and movies are very different from TV shows anyway. And to have that film made and released that still had so much of what made Star Trek from Roddenberry's point of view, the focus on philosophy rather than action, the science in the science fiction. When Star Wars had was taking us back to the days of the Flash Gordon serials, I felt like the first film, and there must have been something in the back of Roddenberry's mind that this might be the only chance I get. I'm going to do everything I can to make it what I want it to be. And getting the original cast back together was probably an achievement too. Not necessarily that they were doing a lot where they might have said no. I mean, because they all came back for the animated series. And when are you going to do a podcast about that? Right. But they all came back. They reprised their roles and they built on them. They weren't just trotting themselves out as a one-off nostalgia trip. They expanded the series and I remember as a kid, I didn't know what to expect going in. I'd loved the show through syndication. As a kid, my brother and I would invite friends over, and we'd all wear different colored turtlenecks, and we would sit in this rotating Barca lounger with cardboard bridge simulations in the basement and pretend Star Trek like crazy. So we just wanted to go in and kind of celebrate this moment of validation for us, and that the soundtrack was incredible. That opening moment of those updated Klingon D7s coming in and seeing the new Klingon foreheads for the first time, hearing the Klingon language for the first, there were so many things that were such a visceral treat. Yes, for, junior high school kid, the plot was slow moving, but 90% of the Star Trek episodes were also fairly slow moving. Maybe I'm an idiot, but the reveal, spoiler alert, the reveal at the end of Voyager is V'ger, that blew my mind. The costumes I didn't know were sort of a riff on his Phase 2 designs. But I actually really enjoyed the costumes. The Klingon costumes were amazing, of course, but I actually like the kind of weird Star Trek jumpsuits, and they make a nice connection to the jumpsuits of the Next Generation, which wouldn't have been possible without that first film. And that first film was successful enough that the others followed. So your odd number thing, I think, is blown apart by movie number one, because movie number one was incredibly successful. I loved that they were able to introduce all of this trope of sexuality with this kind of asexual but totally sexual blonde woman with a glowing thing on her sternum. Right.
Well, she was bald.
She was bald.
Right. Yeah. Sorry. Bald. Sorry. I apologize. Did I say blonde? Boy, that's Freudian. But I remember being, as a kid, a little bit disappointed because my framework was kind of built around what a movie should be around Star Wars. And maybe that's J.J. Abrams' problem. I don't know. But I do remember mercilessly making fun of the wormhole sequence, which again I think was genius because it showed Kirk's fallibility in a lovely way. And on the way home, all of us kept imitating that line. No, belay that phaser.
Photon torpedo. Yeah.
Ridiculous, but memorable.
Yes.
I loved it. The exterior shots of the Enterprise leaving space dock. There were so many things that are worthy of praise in that film, and I think it speaks volumes that I bet a lot of people who were disappointed by that movie when it came out, if they watched it again, they would go, "Oh, that's what I missed."
And it was really an incredibly cinematic approach to it in terms of its art direction, the fact that it was shot in a widescreen format. Once they got into the other movies, then and they started settling into a more familiar pattern that you picked up from the television show, then it became a little less big, if you know what I mean. But yeah, the first motion picture was definitely grand in scale.
It was the last. I think he directed a couple smaller things afterwards, like for television stuff. But it was the last grand Robert Weiss film.
Then he would go back and recut it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yes, in the grand tradition.
In the grand
It was
tradition
just
of recutting.
the underlying metaphor of unintended consequences is so strong in that film, but it doesn't hammer you over the head with it, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it was so Star Trek. And I don't know how you can love Star Trek and not defend that film.
I'm gonna agree with Todd, and I do think it's important to contextualize it. I saw it opening. It's not opening weekend, or not opening night. I definitely think opening weekend, but I think it might have been opening night at, I think, the Bruin Theater in Westwood outside of UCLA, where I was a student my first year there. And I brought a friend who wasn't a Star Trek fan. He like was aware of the series, but like, well, come on, well, come see this thing. You'll see what it's all about. And as a fan, I loved it. And, you know, I mean, those moments of Scotty taking Kirk on a tour outside of the ship, you know, the long, languorous shots of this model that people now make fun of, and is one of the reasons people call it Star Trek, the non-motion picture. You know, I just loved it, seeing the detail that went into it. And Todd was right, the film was a success. I mean, in its era of the late 70s, early 80s, when all these big budget science fiction films were hitting the theaters, Star Trek the Motion Picture was something like number 5 of 1979. It was the biggest, and beat out like opening weekends of Superman and the reissue of Star Wars. And I think in the history of the franchise was the most successful opening weekend of any of the films until 2009 when the reboot came out. But Paramount had invested a lot in this. As Todd mentioned, you know, there had been talk about doing a new Star Trek series, Star Trek Phase 2. So the sets, assembling all the people, etc., were built for the Star Trek TV series, and they folded that into the budget of the film, which was not entirely filmed. So something like a $44 million film in 1979 dollars. But I think fully half of that was the cost of building the sets for the TV series, you know, they built a lot more sets than they ended up using in the show, sets and props and all of those. I mean, they were building a lot of these from scratch because they didn't have leftover from the series, which had been off the air for a decade, you know, so they had built these things to endure. So from Paramount's bottom line, you know, the film would have had to have made like 3 times its budget just to be considered a success.
I was just gonna say, and that's why Roddenberry, despite it being a success, lost control over the show. They took it away from him for the future films, where he's just an executive consultant as opposed to the producer of them.
Right. Also, Roddenberry, they didn't have the marketing for toys and things that they had with Star Wars. I mean, they looked at Star Wars and said, oh my God, look how much this is making in the auxiliary, you know, the toys and such. But because the rights were wrapped up with Roddenberry and CBS and so forth, that wasn't like an open field for them. So for Paramount, it was not as successful as they hoped it would be because it wasn't their next Star Wars.
Sure. Well, you guys made that easy. But yeah, no, I kind of going back to something Todd said about the series going to the movie. The thing I loved about the series was, you know, when I got out of college and was making children's theater and stuff with my ex-wife, and you know, we had to build these fantasy sets ourselves. Just that handmade quality of everything, and that idea of trying to get ideas through on a low budget, and then going back and watching the motion picture where the special effects are very inconsistent, and I don't know who did what, so I don't want to be unfair to the other group, but the initial effects group kind of got moved away, and then oh, his name just escaped me, but the
John Trumbull and Trumbull and Dykstra.
Yeah, and then they were kind of replaced near the end with one of the greatest special effects wizards of all time, 2001.
Trumbull.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so it does seem like there are scenes where it's like, oh, televisions in boxes for windows, and then there are these breathtaking moments where you see this alien ship and the cloud and everything, and it's psychedelic, just vastness, and it's like, oh, that was the thing I loved about the animated series, was that because it was animated, suddenly you could have just the cosmic grandness, because you didn't have to make it a physical set. You could just draw whatever your imagination wanted.
Well, I think too, another thing that makes it, as I've grown older, the movie grows on me more and more, because I think they were so smart not to try and pick up where the series left off, but to show these people having aged and grown, and
Yes.
that they've got to bring Spock back, and that McCoy, when he watched, you feel like these people have continued living a life after the last time you saw them, and that the Federation is aged as well. I just think it was so smart the way they did it, and it never felt nostalgic in that kind of toxic way.
Right.
It never felt like it was trying to capitalize on itself. It had such a genuine affection and care for what they were building on top of, that they didn't alienate any fans. And I'm so grateful that it wasn't any kind of a reboot, that it didn't erase what had gone before.
I really like the fact that they that when they would reintroduce the characters in the film, that they took their time with each one of them, so that they didn't just come on the bridge all at once. It was just, here's Spock over in Vulcan trying to accomplish the Kolinar, and other characters just kind of as you were saying, Todd, moving through life, and until this emergency brings them all back together.
It's so important that Star Trek is about the character relationships as well as the characters in relation to their environment and so forth. So, sorry, Sean, I didn't mean to.
No, you're dovetailing to my point. Is that's what the first film did brilliantly. A lot of the criticism now is about the sort of inconsistent special effects, as you say, and how it kind of feels like two movies kind of fused together. And I'll get to that in a second. But the thing that they did was go back to the series, and the principal actors, developed their characters over three seasons, and they found those elements that who they were by the end of season 3, and sort of stripped away the artifice and got back into it. So Kirk, when he comes onto the bridge of the New Enterprise, he's supposed to be going up there to see the new crew off, to kind of christen it and tell everybody good luck, and kind of stand in the space station and wave at them as they fly away. And instead, off screen, just before the film starts, he's been recruited to captain the ship, and only he knows. And and Shatner really hits those moments where, on the one hand, he's clearly kind of excited about this, but he's also got a lot of guilt. But he also feels like, this is where I belong. But it wasn't my decision; it was somebody else's decision. And unfortunately, although this wasn't clarified in the motion picture itself, he's got a lot of guilt about killing Will Decker's dad. who was
Yeah.
Matt Decker in The Doomsday Machine, played by William Wyndham, one of the best Star Trek episodes ever. That was never mentioned in the motion picture, but that was definitely in the backstory. It's like, you know, he handpicked this guy to be the new captain of the Enterprise because, you know, because he was qualified, but also because his dad was an old friend of his and he had sent him to his death. And now he has to go, you know, that whole thing, sorry, I'm in charge now, you know, and well, I'll figure out something for you to do in the rest of the series. Those are really brilliant moments.
This is really off topic and non-canon. But Sean, have you ever seen James Cawley's Phase 2 fan film with where they find Matt Decker, who's back in time on Earth, and the shuttlecraft is in the garage? It's really terrific. You know, I love both the Phase 2 fan films as well as Vic Mignogna's Star Trek Continues. Not non-canon, but really really deferential and reverential towards the original series.
Yeah.
Yes and yes.
Well, we should probably move on since we still have 5 more films. But one of the
Wait, isn't this a podcast just about Star Trek the Motion Picture? I haven't even gotten into meeting. I haven't even gotten into meeting John Dykstra. Man, I'm gonna have to save that story.
Although before we do leave motion picture, I do want to highlight my favorite scene from it, which is after Spock goes into the ship and encounters the verge of consciousness, that hospital bed scene where he suddenly, having been exposed to pure logic without emotion, is like, no, I need my humanity. Like that is, it's probably one of the best performances by Leonard Nimoy, period.
Lying flat in a hospital bed. I know it's crazy.
Well, no, I mean, like to see Spock like emotionally crack.
Yeah,
it's a very subtle performance, but yeah, when in doubt, Spock needs to be in a severely dressed state. No, anyway, so of course the next film is Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Most people's favorite film. Honestly, it's my favorite film of the series. So the only things I can really kind of critique about it, and again, this isn't so much my interest in like this film's better than this film, but is here's where when you're looking at them as a series, I think they made a choice that kind of reverberates through the rest of the films, which is they did call it Star Trek II, Part 2. Whenever you do a series and you start doing chapter or part, you're kind of investing in a degree of continuity between them.
Thank God.
Thematic, yeah. But like if you look at the next gen films, they don't do the numbering, and they actually do carry on from each other, but there's enough of a sense of each one could be a standalone story. And that's where I think Star Trek II gets a little tricky, because it almost treats Star Trek 1 like it didn't happen. We once again are exploring, Kurt dealing with getting older and assuming command. There's a lot of retread of narrative beats that we had already in the other film, and does it handle them better? Maybe, but that's really the only criticism I can bring to that one in this attempt to elevate the odds and bring the evens down a peg.
When I went several years ago, Paramount had celebrated its 75th anniversary, and they showed a lot of television. They screened a lot of television, and as well as motion pictures. And I had never seen Star Trek II on the big screen until that festival. And so Paramount had provided this print that was shown at the LA County Museum. And so we went to go see it, and the title came on without the 2 attached to it,
Nice.
which was really interesting. But that was the only time I ever saw a print of the film without 2. It was simply called Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan. So that I thought that was interesting. I don't know where they went, what made them decide to add a 2 to it.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, it.
Well, it's interesting, Corey, that, you know, the thing that you're saying about the continuity as opposed to standalone episodes, that's one of the big criticisms that people have about Discovery, is that unlike the television show, it's not individual episodes. And it's very true about the show because, as probably everybody knows, the first televised episode was not the first one shot. That it was switched around so that the Salt Monster episode ran first, so that because people would be more excited about a monster than the kind of philosophical episode that that Roddenberry wanted to be the first episode. I you know, full disclosure, I did twice win. I may be the only person to ever have won been awarded the Nicholas Meyer Undergraduate Playwriting Award at the University of Iowa. So I've never actually met Nick. I did have a lot of correspondence with him as the recipient of that award. But I think the thing that Nicholas Meyer really did was bridge that gap that I was talking about between the kind of Roddenberry focus of Star Trek and the public's appetite for a Star Wars kind of action film. And we get the kind of action adventure that the Khan episode, Space Seed, I think is the title, originally never had, right? I think he did a really good job of reaching back to the original series and building that continuity that maybe in a way leapfrogged over the first film, the way you say, and made a stronger bridge to the original series because it brings back Khan and all of those old relationships.
Right.
So that may be another factor in why this film is so beloved. It really feels like one of those action episodes from the original series. And if you ever get a chance on the YouTubes, there's a great interview with Nicholas Meyer talking about his tricks as a director to get the performance he needed out of Shatner. And then there's this great companion interview with Ricardo Montalban talking about how hesitant he was to take on the role and how Nicholas Meyer got a performance out of him that wasn't Mr. Rourke in space. So I really recommend people go and look at those.
With his real chest.
It was his real chest.
Yeah.
The only fault I find in the film, and it's become iconic, and so people will probably criticize it. And I actually love the Monster Maroon uniforms, but I think they were too militaristic for Starfleet. They to me, though I love them, they're a little too evocative of the SS Panzerwrap from World War II. And I think that was probably intentional on the costume designer's part. But, you know, I hate the kinds of people. I don't hate anyone. I apologize. Touchy-feely. I have a large amount of disrelish for the kind of Star Trek fan who sees Starfleet as a militaristic rather than scientific organization. So that's my view.
And the original openings don't talk about going to war. I mean, that whole mantra of the series was going boldly. So I'm trying to use proper grammar here.
I think he did I think Roddenberry did a really good job of trying to balance that exploration of strange new worlds without it being colonialism. You know, we invited people to join the Federation. We didn't conquer them. And the Klingons were a really excellent vehicle for kind of showcasing that contrast.
Yeah.
You're right, Corey, in that when Harv Bennett was brought on to to produce the new film, he did kind of want to skip the first one.
Yep.
Because it was his first film. So he took it upon, well, I shouldn't say that. I don't know if he took it upon himself or was given the instruction by Paramount, but he was not directing a sequel to Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
Right.
He was not. They were not trying to cash in, on like the people who went back to see multiple Indiana Jones or Star Wars movies. It wasn't, oh, we love that film, now we want to come see that one. See, he wanted to build a new audience. They wanted to go sort of beyond the fandom, but also capitalize on the fandom. He didn't know the series, so he was literally given 3/4-inch video cassettes to go home and watch them. And he was acquainted with the series, but he wasn't a fan. He wasn't really that familiar with it. And he's the one. Harv Bennett is the one who picked Space Seed. It's like, oh wait, that's what I want to capture. And if you look at Space Seed, it is it is a bit more militaristic. And I agree with Todd. I had the same reaction. I went to go see the film opening week, and when they came on in these new uniforms, it's like, well, wait a minute. They're supposed to be like in long sleeve T-shirts and boots, and this does look very military. And by the time they're in the space station and lowering the dead bodies that, sorry, spoiler, that Khan and his crew had strung up, is like, this is not my Star Trek. But so they service people who came in looking for adventure. Nazis in space, but also service the fans who, because there's so many Easter eggs in the film, harkening back to the original series, and it in that way it was kind of brilliant the way it merged, bringing in the fans and building a new, pardon the turn of phrase, but a next generation of fans of the films.
Well, Sean, in that interview I was talking about with Montalban, he kind of says the same thing. He was hesitant about, he kind of says he barely even remembered doing that episode. So he asked for the tape and he watched it again, and it was watching the videotape that gave him a pathway into the character and helped him understand, oh, this is a person who is driven by vengeance because Kirk killed his wife, right? And so it's, for the audience, it's this big space shoot 'em up, but for the actors and the characters, it's so deeply personal.
I really love the character relationships in this film as well. I think they were honing in even further between, there's that scene after they look at the Genesis tape that was, in which they have this debate over whether or not this is a good thing. With Spock advocating it, and with McCoy going, aren't we being a little loosey-goosey with our power here? And Kirk kind of in the middle again. It's that triumvirate that I think that is classic Star Trek as far as characters are concerned. So it's just and also that as a kind of a side note, the Genesis, the animation of the Genesis planet being formed was actually done by Pixar Animation Studios in its early days.
How about that?
Yeah.
I love that moment of realization of Chekhov when he realizes where they are and who is there.
Hutton Bay. Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah. We're not going to rehash the fact that Chekhov wasn't actually in the original. He was just off screen. We just didn't see him.
No, he was in season 2.
Engineering,
exactly.
wasn't he?
Yeah, exactly. So, he just wasn't a bridge crew yet.
He was in season 2 though.
Yes, and Space Seed was in season 1.
Right. Oh, I got you. I'm sorry, I missed the point.
Right. So when Khan says, "I never forget a face," if you're hardcore Star Trek fan, you say, "You've never seen his face," but we won't go into that. I want to give.
Oh no, you know what? He did see his face because he looked at all of the records when he was on board,
right?
And he probably saw all the personnel photos, and he committed those to memory.
Yeah, exactly. I want to give a shout out to Shatner here because again, people love to make fun of Shatner's overacting, but he has so many brilliant moments of them, and the one that people make the most fun of is when he's stranded down in the Genesis chamber, and he's talking to Khan over the communicator, and Khan says, "I'm just, I'm giving you a fate worse than death," and he goes, "Khan!" and everybody loves to make fun of that Khan moment. But what's so brilliant about it is that not only is William Shatner acting, James Kirk is acting, because he's had the coded message with Spock. He knows that Spock is going to be rescuing him in a couple of hours, and he has to persuade Khan that he's really abandoning him there. And then once Khan leaves, Kirk is like, "Hey, let's go get something to eat," because he knows that his buddy is coming to pick him up in a couple of hours. It's a brilliant multi-layered moment.
Yeah, Shatner had a couple of those moments in the original series too, when he is being someone else using his body, like the episode where the woman takes over his body,
right?
And the episode with Garth, right?
Right.
Where, again, the overacting is Garth being Kirk, angry that he's been stymied by the chess code.
Yeah.
So yes, Star Trek
I want to say too, real quickly, that one of the great things about Star Trek II is the introduction of the Reliant and the Miranda class ship. So just want to get that out there. And I love that when the model was originally shown to Roddenberry, he thought it was upside down.
Yes. So like I said, I'm not going to attempt to really knock the beloved 2 down, but I think a couple good points were brought out, militaristic stuff. However, in defending 3, I think the biggest critique of 3, The Search for Spock, is that it takes the piss out of the ending of Star Trek 2. Spock dies. It is one of the great deaths of cinema. And then you make a movie where he comes back. It's sort of the Marvel treatment. Nobody's really dead. However, my defense for this is, if you don't like that they bring him back, that's part 2's fault. Everything is set up in part 2. The mind meld scene is shot with Bones in part 2. So it's one of those things where I agree, as a trope, I like characters to stay dead. I like things to have consequence. But
well, apparently Leonard Nimoy did not want Spock dead anymore after that. So,
and he got the director's chair to do something about it.
Yeah,
it's so interesting because Spock after 2 becomes the same kind of, and again, people may get angry at this comparison, but I only use it for illustrative purposes. Spock becomes the kind of through line for all of the films up to Abrams that 3PO is in Star Wars.
Oh, now
wow.
I see. Yeah. Whether he's the driving force or he's the cause and effect. Absolutely.
He's definitely there to observe everything.
Yeah. 3, I think, is sort of the victim of this being just like a trope formula otherwise, besides just the concept of bringing Spock back and the leaps and bounds of that. I think it's a good film. I think people hear Christopher Lloyd's going to be a villain and they laugh at that, and they don't actually consider the performance that he gives. This is where we start to see across the films a problem with depicting Klingons, which is, maybe not even a problem, more just a preference thing. They will go back and forth between to, oh, and actually now we must plot our course to the thing, and it's, they're either like British actors or they're cavemen, and they're often depicting both at the same time, cutting back and forth. I think Lloyd, though, to the extent that the problem is there, balanced it pretty well as being this kind of eloquent, tactical, intuitive Klingon. And I think he's, of the Klingon villains, he's the best. I think this is the last kind of big budget Star Wars film. So, jeez, I did it too.
Sorry,
Editing.
Damn you, Abrams. It's the last big budget Star Trek film of the original run. And I think it's good. So far, I've had you guys doing the work for me on these. How do you feel about 3?
I really like 3. It does start the trope of we got to blow the Enterprise up every movie.
Yeah.
A movie could be considered an episode in this.
Time,
I do think Nimoy also, real quick, because we have one of the characters directing now, and it's
Actors.
Actors, yes. One of the actors who played one of the characters is directing now. There's a little bit more, even more attention towards kind of making sure everyone is in there and gets a moment. Because as true as that is about what you were saying about 1, Sulu is just a cameo, basically, and then just a face in front of the corner of the screen, where this...
Don't call me tiny.
Yeah, don't call me tiny is a great moment. So there was, not everybody really got to super shine, but Uhura gets her moment. Sulu gets his. There's just a little bit more of that, making sure it's not just the trifecta of power.
Yeah, well, I think I'm going to go, as you may have seen, I like the behind the scenes stuff here. That Nimoy was hesitant about coming back for the first film in the first place because, among other things, he didn't like the way that his likeness had been merchandised. I mean, it's like Spock was used to like a can of beer or something like that.
Heineken.
Heineken, thank you.
Yeah.
Right. It's the logical choice. So he was like, no, I'm not doing this. So he wanted more control. So he had agreed to. When they did 1, they figured that's it. We're done, one and done. It's Paramount wasn't happy with it.
They had to write. They had to write a check to get him back for 1.
Well, not just get a check, but he said, kill off Spock, and I'll come back. And then when they started filming it, he kind of got into the groove and he enjoyed it. So then he worked out, okay, I'll come back, but I want to direct, which was kind of brilliant. So by the end of 2, that's why it could have gone either way. They were ready to go either way. And I remember seeing one of the writers when I was at UCLA. They often brought in films and brought in production people to talk about them. And one of the writers was a little surprised when he said, "I'm sorry, you're what now? Spock's coming back, but we've already written the big death scene for him." So they came up with the planting the Capron, which they invented for the film. By the end of 2, Nimoy was like, "I'm ready. I can't wait," And so literally, the only thing they could do with 3 was it had to be about bringing Spock back, and that had to become the plot of the film. It couldn't be just oh, he showed up. I was only mostly dead, So they had to hang the entire film on this conceit of how do we bring him back and how do we keep Nimoy off screen for as much as possible so he could focus on the filming.
Yeah. Also, in the advertising campaign, unfortunately, had revealed before the film opened the destruction of the Enterprise. I was really surprised when I switch on the TV and there's the ad for it, and I'm looking forward to seeing it, and there it is, come see the final moments of the Starship Enterprise as you see it a blaze passing through your screen. And I remember standing there looking at it going, what?
Yeah.
They're destroying the Enterprise? It sounded like a surprise that probably should have been not advertised, but we didn't have the internet in those days. So, but I remembered working at a place because Sean and I ended up being employed at the UCLA Film and Television Archive in an overlap of years before he moved on. And but I was working in a place that was actually adjacent to the archive that we worked out of. And I had just seen the film, and one of the clerks there said, "What did you think of it? What was your favorite part?" And I said, actually, my favorite part was, "I have had enough of you." And she laughed and she said, "You're such a quiet guy that I wouldn't be surprised that you would like that moment where you just kind of let it all go." And I said, "Oh, well, I never thought of it that way, but okay." I mean, there was the heist that happens when they steal the Excelsior. Sorry, guys, if you haven't seen it, but it's there are some fun moments and playful moments that are in this film. Again, character driven, maybe because of my theater background, and that I enjoyed those performances on that basis. And then to see the Excelsior being one, big fucking ship. So it's
Shatner and Lloyd are in this new old man buddy film called Senior Moments. And I'm going to go see it, but I know that I'm going to watch the whole thing imagining them in their Star Trek 3 costumes.
I'm waiting for Shatner to say, "I have had enough of you." Doug, were you with me? You know this story. You know the story I'm leading up to. Were you with me for the Academy screening of Star Trek 3 when Hart Bennett was there and Leonard Nimoy and some of the other cast members?
No, I missed that one.
Okay, so Star Trek 3 had already come out, and was invited to the Motion Picture Academy for a screening there. And as I said, Hart Bennett was there, Leonard Nimoy was there, I think Jimmy Doohan was there, Shatner wasn't. And it was for Academy members. And this moment has been written about. Maybe it happened more than once, but I was actually there when someone asked him about Star Trek 4. It had already come out that Nimoy was going to be directing Star Trek 4, and they said, the end. What are you going to do with Star Trek 4? And obviously they're not going to tell us. But he said, well, we have. It was Hart Bennett. He said, well, we had kind of a built-in. Leonard and I have kind of a built-in beginning that we've worked out. He said, you remember that Star Trek 3 begins with the final shots of Star Trek 2, where they show again where Spock is in the chamber and so forth. And in the end of 3 is Spock has had his memory restored. He's walking away from these people, and then he turns back and he comes back to Kirk and he says, "Jim, your name is Jim." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Okay, so that's how we're going to start Star Trek 4. We'll be back on Vulcan. Spock is getting his memory back. We're going to see that scene again, but we're going to see what happens next." He goes up to Kirk and he says, "Jim, your name is Jim." And then he walks over to McCoy and he says, "Jim, your name is Jim." Yeah.
I remember that story though, but yeah.
Yeah, they didn't do that for whatever reason, but.
I'm glad you brought that up for the story itself, but also because it reminded me, having reviewed the films for this, it's funny that scene is so iconic of Jim, because the next movie, 4, which again it's my job now to attack and fail, he spends the whole thing not calling him Jim. Like, it's just like a funny little continuity thing of like, you made this big thing of him calling him Jim, and then the next movie Shatner's like, "Will you just call me Jim?" Well, I think we can't make every one of these episodes 2 hours long, and that's as good of a stopping point as any as we go into 4, 5, and 6. So tune in next week where we continue our adventures. I see them bringing out the Romulan ale now.